Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today's day is Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025, and this is episode 46. I want to thank all the support we've been getting, all the listeners. We've gotten a lot of cool emails in. People that have stayed in touch with us ever since day one, honestly. A lot of great support. And you can find us, you can email us at recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. You can also, we have a private Facebook page. It's 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. Get on there and send us a request and we'll approve you. And you can also find us at Audible. We got a bunch of stuff on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Just Podomatic is another platform that we use pretty often. And we also have a lot of cool stuff coming up this month. Next, let's see, let me look at the calendar. Wednesday, July 9th, we have John E. from Lebanon, Tennessee coming up. We're going to do an episode on We Agnostics. We also have Sunday, July 13th, Scott Lee is going to be doing a episode on, he has a new book that he's just published just a couple months back, and he's going to share that with us. The book's called, let's see, what is it? It's called, Life is the School, Love is the Subject. Yeah, it's a wonderful little short, a lot of short stories in there. It's pretty awesome. He's going to go over some of that stuff with us, and then tonight is the episode everyone's been waiting for all the listeners. This is we have Lisa H. from Lebanon, Tennessee. How you doing?
Woohoo! It's me.
Yeah. For all the listeners, Lisa is my wife, and we've been knowing each other for quite a while. How long we've known each other now? 8 years now, right? Yeah.
Knowing, probably 9.
Yeah.
Almost 9. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the episode everyone's been waiting for, and Lisa's been a major part of my life for years now. She's a big part of the recovery community here in our hometown. Actually, she is right now halfway across the state in Sevierville, Tennessee, near the Smoky Mountains, and I'm home keeping the fort down, so holding the fort down.
And hopefully my phone doesn't cut out. So if we have any connection issues, we will address that on the back end, I suppose. So
yeah. All right, so let's just start off by just having the listeners get to know a little bit about you, babe. What's your sobriety date? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Wonderful. Well, my name is Lisa Horn. My sobriety date is September the 23rd of 2016, and I am undoubtedly a grateful, productive, active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's why I agree to do these things. I'm so when Paul asked me, he said, when we started talking about, hey, I want to do a YouTube. Paul wanted to start a YouTube channel. I really want to get the message out there. There's a need, and I was like, great, I'm going to be the first the first person that gets to go on this YouTube channel. I'll be the first participant. Yeah. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny that it took 46 to get me here.
Yeah.
So that may or may not show up on a fifth step at some point, but here we are, and I'm glad to be here. So there's that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, you can't have your wife on your first episode. That's just all there is to it. Yeah. That's,
Oh, geez.
Yeah, you can't.
Let me take the shovel from you.
Yeah.
Let's take the shovel.
Yeah. All right, so it's September 23rd, 2016. Let's talk a little bit about what life looked like. Let's just say the last 2 years up until that date.
The last 2 years, wow. The last 2 years looked like I was, my residence was Lowell Correctional Facility in Ocala, Florida. I had been sentenced to, at that point, a 36-month stint, due to the consequences of my alcoholism. And at that point, I was probably, I would like to stay as hopeless as I had ever been. But I'm a chameleon, and that's why more about alcoholism stands out to me so much, is because of the mental state that continues to push us closer to the relapse, and then closer to the delusion that one day I will be able to control and enjoy this thing, whether it's, locked up or on the streets or stone cold sober, managing my life, whatever it looks like. I have this thing to my core. And so leading up to, I got out of prison, and thought that I could, manage my life on my own willpower. And I couldn't do that, obviously. I've not met one of us that can for any long period of time. And I wound straight back up in the county jail, because of the results of the consequences of my alcoholism. And man, it just continued to spiral from there. I wound up in, I'm the product of a recovery house baby. I got sober in a halfway house. I was sitting in the county jail for, God, it seems like it had been like 18 months. I had been there for about 18 months, and this girl came in the county jail, and they put her in the cell with me, and she was describing this life that it seemed unimaginable to me. It seemed untouchable for a person like me. She was talking about being sober, holding a job. She had shared some of her past life with me, and it lined up with the path I was on. And we were in the cell together for about 6 months, and she continuously shared with me how wonderful her life had been transformed. And it was crazy because I was attracted to how she was living her life. But when I would ask her and say, like, man, how did you get to that point? Like, what did you do to be employable? What did you do to be, honorable? What did you do? How did you do that? And she said, man, there's this program. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they live, the people that are in the program, they work these steps, these 12 steps, and they start to conceive these concepts, these principles that are, based off the steps, and live by these integral, foundational, pivoting movements that are growing up about them. And we get to, it's awesome. We're sober. And I was like, yeah, wait a minute. You mean like you gotta and entire abstinence, like not use at all, like go to a meeting every day. That's what you had to do to get that. Yeah, that sounds cool, but I'm not interested. And I'll tell you, like, she gnawed on my ear with that for a good 6 months, like I had mentioned. And I was getting out of the county jail. My family wanted nothing to do with me. My children wanted, nothing to do with me. I had nobody to call, nobody to turn to. And I looked at my cellmate and I was like, hey, you're in here cleaning up the wreckage of your past willingly, stone cold sober. And if anybody can become willing to do that, because in my track record proves, like, catch me if you can. I'm not doing anything to clean up my wreckage on my own willpower. So she and I had connected on a level that was intriguing to me. And I asked her for the phone number of the recovery house she was living at. And when I called, the lady answered the phone. And when she answered the phone, she said that if I could get from the county jail I was at to the recovery house in Lebanon, Tennessee, that there was a bed waiting on me. And it's only by the grace of God, something completely outside of me, that when they opened the doors of the county jail, that I made it the 90 miles to Lebanon, Tennessee without taking a drink. And that's where it all started. It all started right there. I got to this little recovery house and it was on. It was on. There was no questions about it. Go to a meeting every day, get a sponsor, utilize that sponsor, do every single thing that this program suggests to the best of your ability. And most importantly, don't get drunk. And that was a tall order, just like what is described and more about alcoholism, because I would have believed that I had tried in my past to stop using. But my truth is that I loved the idea of the first drink, and I loved the idea of how that made me feel. And the thought of doing anything but that was crippling. And so I wasn't sure that I was ready. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty convinced that I was not ready. But I showed up, and Alcoholics Anonymous does what it does, and it tricked me into getting sober. And then that's where I'm here today. Thank God. So.
Nice. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sponsorship. Whenever you first got there, when you first got into Alcoholics Anonymous, the sponsorships that you had.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you. So again, the rules of the house, here they are, and man, I had all the ideas. Oh, I got to have somebody that's cutthroat, that is been through the ringer, that has done it worse than me. And man, I've been through a lot. I don't trust women. I don't trust people. I don't, and and it's funny because those same things that I would share are the same things that the women share with me today. And I'm like, I know, me too. But there was this lady, I had my first sponsor, fantastic woman, and I'm not going to mention a bunch of names here on the platform, but she was a fantastic woman, and she was my first sponsor for somewhere around 18 months. She worked me through the 12 steps. I'll be honest with you, I more than half measured what she was suggesting. I would take, it was kind of as if it was like, oh, this is the checkbox. Okay, I have to call the sponsor every day. Check. She wants me to meet with her on Tuesdays. Check. She wants me I got to write some stuff down in this book. Check. And so like she was fantastic, and still today is a huge part of my recovery, of the recovery of a lot of ladies. But somewhere along the lines, I finally, the light bulb went off, and I'm like at this turning point at about 18 months. And I was like, gosh dang, I've got to do something different, or this thing just ain't going to work for me. Because if this is all it has to offer, well, I'm in trouble. Okay. Because, this thing's powerful. The disease is powerful. And thank God, I at that point I was moving out of the recovery house, and life was getting real for me. I had done just enough to skate by and meet all the requirements, and not get kicked out of the recovery house, and not get, God forbid, pregnant first thing in AA, who knows? And so I switched sponsors. There was this lady that was very attractive to me, still is very attractive to me. She, I was willing to listen to what she had to say. I could see the program working in her life. I could see the program working in other women's lives that she was sponsoring. And I jumped on the bandwagon, and I stayed connected, in this home group. I stayed connected with this sponsor. We were young and wild and free, doing all the things. And the reason that I picked more about alcoholism is, because when I got with my second sponsor, and of course, these things were suggested to me in the beginning, but I did it, half measured, right? Like they told me to go through the book, find some stories in the back, find something that you can relate to. Let's read the chapters, sit down, knee to knee, do the things. And I would do those things. But at that point in my life, I couldn't hold together or comprehend a sentence. I couldn't look at the words on the pages and retain the information. So as I had sobered up, and the fog began to clear just a little bit, I had more of an understanding of what AA was bringing to the table. And so anyways, it was suggested to go through the book and find, something that had stood out to me. Well, the format of my home group at the time was a couple of different things. You could pick a couple of different readings. And one of the readings that you could choose from was the first page and 3/4 in More About Alcoholism. Now, I had read the book. I'd been sponsoring women at that point. I had been through, line by line to the best of my ability. But every time that I would pick up that that reading and read it as the beginning of the opening of the meeting, something would happen inside of me. I'd get those warm and fuzzies. I'd get that, like, dang, this is me all over this. And then the realization that, guess what? There's more to the laminated handout that they give you in the meeting. There's a whole dang chapter in here about that thing. And thank goodness my sponsor, she sat down with me and we went over it. She really, we read it, and I would read it, and I would listen to different things, and it just really grabbed a hold of me and gave me, it was a pivotal point, excuse me, in my recovery, to understand why I do the things that I do, how I react the way that I react, and the descriptions of the sanity, the insanity, the obsession, the illusion, the delusion, the ultimately the crux of our problem. And so here we are today. It was a no-brainer for me when I was asked to do this. Anybody that I sponsor today, my sponsor today, anybody that I have, a chance to talk this game we call life in AA with today, they know that this is the jam for me, more about alcoholism. So
Nice. I'm sitting here with it right in front of me right now, reading over it. What does it say? Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better.
Never better. Never better.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about it. What really stands out to you?
So a couple of things, right? Like, well, obviously what you just spoke on was, over a considerable period, we get worse, never better. The main thing in the book, the very first line that jumps off the page to me is that it's on page 30, and it says, "We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control." And that was baffling to me. That was like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that, 10, if somebody puts and this is funny that we're talking about this, my husband and I, when we'll be driving down the road and I said, you mean to tell me that if somebody puts, a glass of beer in front of you, you don't have the power to say no, thank you? You mean to tell me that you have no control? And we'll go back and forth about the crux of our problem, the mental state that precedes the relapse. It's not about being willing to be like, oh no, thank you. Obviously, we have the way the book describes. God gave us brains to use. We unblock ourselves from the insanity and open ourselves to the sunlight. And we are able to make safe and sound decisions. But when I'm blocked from that, when I have that compounding, obsessing blockage, I don't have the ability to make right choices and move right action. I don't have that. And ultimately what that leads me to is the drink, right? And so all through this chapter, as we go down, all of the cute things, all of the things, the way that I could increase this list, the things that I've tried. Here are some of the methods that we have tried: drinking only, beer only, limiting the numbers of drinks, not having it in the house, doing all these things. Right there at the bottom where it says we could increase this list ad infinitum. And my sponsor at the time, she said, Lisa, increase that list. Tell me what you've tried and how you've been successful. Lisa, show me anything outside of the good old God that has worked for you. Put it on the paper. And in doing that, what ends up happening is I take it straight back to the delusion. That I believe that when I'm in that state, that if I think that I can do that, I am in, what do they say? Like a flight from reality, right? Like I'm in the delusion, that I have the power to get and or stay sober, that I have the power to make right choices, and left to my own without God's help, I ain't got it. I just don't have it. And so, and kind of, moving on from there, and the way that the book gets into the mental twists, the other things that stand out to me are a bunch of things like that, right? Number one, we mentioned the delusion of control, right? Being like the keynote is like the idea that someday, somehow I will control and enjoy drinking. We mentioned that. And the purpose for it is to give me the ability to realize that, that I live based off the lie of self-control and moderation. Whether it's And I can do it with many things, but ultimately with my drinking. I can do it with my meeting attendance. I can do it with my job. I can do it in my relationship with my husband. I can do it in my relationship with my kids. I live based off the lie of self-control and moderation, whatever it is. But the truth is I'm an all or nothing kind of gal. I'm wide open no matter what it is. If I'm 100% at work, I'm 100% there. If I'm 100% at home, I'm 100% there. But it's in very short intervals, right? Like the way the book describes, or not the book, but the way the cliches we hear in meetings. That what does they say? Something about we're great sprinters, But I get lost in the marathon. That's where I. What do they say, Paul?
It's
Something like that.
Yeah, it's I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I think
Yeah.
it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
I'm the one that you get me for a good 3 minutes. Okay, you get me for a good 3 minutes. I live based off the lie that I'm moderating, that I have self-control, and the truth is that I have no business even thinking that I have the right to do that.
Yeah. Well, it brings up real quick. So it brings up the fact that if you talk to a non-alcoholic about a conversation like this, like people that can drink on a pretty regular basis, but don't have a physical reaction to alcohol. If you talk to them about have they ever attempted to quit and not been successful, they look at you like sideways. They're like, well, that's pointless even. Like, why would you ask that? For them, it seems just goofy or silly, and so just for the simple fact that, like, usually when I'm sitting across, and this doesn't make someone necessarily, like, when I'm qualifying someone, as an alcoholic, when I'm going through this chapter with someone, I don't necessarily, I can usually just have a conversation with someone and just see right away whether they get it or not. Because they're powerless. And it's something you touched on earlier was it's pretty much like a power greater than me has separated me from alcohol since my sobriety day. And if you look at how, like, every waking moment of my life, I was just reading over, what does it say? We doubt if any of them can do it. It's talking about if someone could quit for a while. I was the kind of drinker, which, again, this don't make me an alcoholic, but I was the kind of drinker where, like, I never, I'd hear people talking about going on a spree, and I didn't go on sprees. I just surrendered to the fact that every waking moment of my life, to a certain point, don't get me wrong, like, I would, sometimes if I had to go to work or whatever, I wouldn't get belligerent or whatever before work. But if I was, when I got off work, you best believe I was going to have alcohol or something else.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I wasn't the kind of guy that was going to be like, oh, okay, I could stop for a little while. I never really attempted because I didn't want to. I did not like life sober.
Right. So when the book talks about, like, the thing that we've already touched on is that we believe that we cling to this idea that one day we'll be able to drink normally. In my drinking career, I believe I had surrendered to the fact that this was it. I was just going to be, that was just how I was going to roll from here on out. Rather, I was going to die an alcoholic death, get hit by the train, or wind up in prison for the rest of my life due to the consequences. That was it for me. So coming into Alcoholics Anonymous and seeing through my cellmate the transformation in her life and just by that little bit of hope from her, being willing to see that there was a way out, right? Mm. And I was able to let go of that idea once I had gotten, the junk cleared out, right? I was able to let go of that idea of ever wanting to control or ever wanting to enjoy my drinking. It being, as the book describes, that great obsession of every one of us. Thank God, today I can surrender to the fact that, like, I hear it all the time. Once you have had a taste of God, nothing else will do, right? So if that's the case, as it is for me, then the drink then becomes obsolete. The thought of the drink. Now, when I'm in the thick of it, right? Like I haven't had a desire to drink in I don't even know when, right? Like I can't, obviously, since sometime between today and or sometime between September 23rd of 2016 and today, it was removed, and I can't tell you when, and I can't tell you. It doesn't even matter, right? Because for me, that my goal today is God and more of it. And so moving on to like the you just touched on the qualification, like the definition of the real alcoholic, right? And that talks about the progression of me. And this is for me. This is how I interpret more about alcoholism in this chapter. The emphasis, the way it emphasizes on the progression of the illness, is stating that like we always get worse, never better. Well, guess what, folks? For me, right, when I let up on the things that I should be doing, that I know keep me happy, joyous, and free, as this program promises me, so long as I maintain that spiritual connection, when I let up on those things, I get worse, right? Like spiritually, emotionally, so this thing is just a huge part of my daily routine, a huge reminder of the disease. And then it's going to go straight down into the way that the book describes our disease as being mental as well as physical, right? Like, so this thing is not just about drink in hand, here I stand. This thing is deep rooted, and it, for me, it's 10 miles in, 10 miles out. So I still have to give myself to AA service and God the way that I gave myself to the bottle. And in order to keep that path clear, in order to keep my mind, progressive and sane. Because without it, then I'm stuck with, the same thing that the book describes again. The same thing in my brain, these strange mental blank spots, these peculiar little parts of life or situations that I have no idea what has happened. I don't. That we get when, and more about alcoholism, we get down to the stories of what is the
mixing whiskey with milk.
Yeah, let's talk. We get down. Who is it? Is it Fred or Jim? Oh, it's Jim. I think Jim. Jim is the salesman. We get into the story of the salesman, and dude, I can picture that in my life. Here I am. Sometimes I have to travel for work, and I'll be going back and forth between Nashville and East Tennessee, Nashville, Knoxville. And I have to, I have to kind of plan my day. I have to stay connected with my girls. I have to stay connected with my sponsor. I have to stay connected, rooted in the program. I have to stay connected with God, because it makes me chuckle when I read it. But when you're reading that story about Jim, and it describes, like, this is a man that was, from what I understand, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And am I wrong, right? Like, he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's out here, I don't know, I'm perceiving doing the deal. He's going to make a car deal. He sits down at the bar restaurant, and before he knows it, he's ordered 2 sandwiches and is saucy. He's got his whiskey and his milk because it seems like a great idea. Maybe I won't get too toasty if I add some milk,
Yeah, it says
How,
that
what, go ahead.
the definition, or on page 37, where it gives one of the definitions that they give for insanity. It says he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish
Right.
idea that he could take whiskey if only mixed with milk. Then it says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How could such a lack of proportion and the ability to think straight be called anything else?
The way that the mind rationalizes the first drink, the way that I believe it's okay, the way that I will, left to my own willpower, if I am not connected, stone cold sober, rationalize the idea of a first drink. And I pray to God, like my connection with you know all of the people about me, with life in general, has got to stay broad. It's got to stay real big, because if not, I think about that often, right? Like, who would know? Who would know? And the other guy, the alcoholic number, what is it, 3? He's a successful businessman. I believe myself to be successful, right? Like, I believe myself to be educated. I believe myself to be a prominent in my community, I would hope, or in my little world, wife, employee, mother, all of these things. And he convinced himself, right?
Yeah.
Because he convinced himself he was okay.
Well,
He convinced himself that he didn't need this anymore.
yeah, well, what it says is, it's what you touched on, like when you go somewhere that you have to, stay connected, because that's what it says about him. Is it says, but but he had failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And it talks about that.
Yeah.
Bill talks about how if we failed to enlarge our spiritual life, but then with Jim, it says that's what he did. He had failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid successions.
And I'll tell you, to circle back to old Jim there, the car salesman, I was probably about 5 years sober or so, and and man, I had gotten a resentment the size of Texas, and just become unwilling to continue to work through it at some degree, or felt as though that it wasn't worth working through, I should say. And a chain of events led me to new sponsorship, and I'm undoubtedly grateful for the entire lineage that has played a part in keeping this old gal on the straight and narrow, because trust me, it takes a village. My sponsor today, that was the very first thing. I'll never forget the moment. Man, I'm going to do a huge shout out. If you're ever in Lebanon, we have an awesome women's meeting at the First Presbyterian Church. We rock and roll there every Monday night at 6:00. Anywhere from 60 to 90 plus women a night there, and it's awesome. So if you're ever in Lebanon, please look us up on the meeting guide app. But I was standing I'd pulled this lady to the side, and we were standing in the cathedral of this church, and gosh, I get chills thinking about it, because I told her, I was like, I think that I'm drying out. I think that I'm resentful. I'm undoubtedly discontented with a few things that are happening in my life right now. And I was trembling, and she was holding my hands, And she said, honey, it's going to be okay. She said, we just got to get you unblocked. We got to get you to enlarge your spiritual life, you know? And it was almost instantaneous. I can't describe this to normal folks. They would be like, this lady, get the heck out of here. But if you've ever experienced that moment in sobriety when, you know, you're almost even more so hopeless at some degree than you were when you were drinking, and the fear of the unknown and insecurity of the what if takes over. When you feel that sense of comfort, the comfort that the book describes, you get from taking the first drink, is that comfort that I had touched on earlier. Once you've had a taste of God, nothing else will do. And that was God speaking through her to me. Girl, we've got this. You know, we're going to do it shoulder to shoulder. And what we're aiming for is to enlarge your spiritual life, so we can then clean out the wreckage and rightly relate ourselves. And that was huge for me. You know, that was huge for me. And all through this chapter, living through the delusion, the insanity, the confusion, the obsession of what was at that point in my life, again, stone cold sober, and it's just gotten tenfold. It's just blown up from there. So anyways, I wanted to touch on that, just about the spirituality side, like enlarging that part of our life. It's monumental. So anyhow.
Yeah.
All right. I think I cut you off, Paul, but
No, you didn't. No, it was good.
That.
What comes to mind I'd went through a lot of this stuff for a long time and didn't realize what it was really pointing at. And you just touched on some of it right there, on like how, I have to get unblocked. I find out this is how I act as if I'm blocked, and I was sharing about it in a meeting last night on how I remember a few years ago, this man had asked me to sponsor him, and he'd been sober for like 12 or 13 years. And so we sat down and started talking about this stuff. And what he had been doing for years was just like going to meetings and, calling a sponsor, and they would talk about things together or whatever. But he had no clue, what it meant to, first off, that you have to live on a spiritual basis if you're going to sustain sobriety. That's the key to this whole thing, is to get unblocked and start living from an awakened spirit and sharing it with others. And he had no clue any of that. And he had, at that point, he had shared with me some pretty personal stuff about that had been going on in his life. And he didn't stay sober. Like he ended up relapsing, like actually right before he asked me to sponsor him. And then, but looking back on it, it was like so clear that this man had gotten so far like off track from, like, so far diverted from his, moral compass or base or whatever you want to call it, that he had, it was just too unbearable for him that he had to put something in him. And I was, it's the same thing. So you come through, you get sober, you quit drinking, power greater than yourself separates you from alcohol. You fall in love with this community or not. Sometimes you don't really, you don't like it for a while, but hopefully you can kind of meet some people that you're attracted to that have something that you want. And then, hopefully you realize, it took me a while. I didn't realize this for a long time, but what we're here for is to get unblocked, because that lack of proportion and the ability to think straight, that right there, that insanity of the first drink will come back if I'm not, if I divert too far away from, it shows how important integrity and and honor and stuff is if I drift too far away from like my core, then it's so easy to get so sidetracked and to where that insanity comes right back. If you look what it's saying right there, it's what it says.
Yeah, right. So this it draws us back to that spiritual solution, and it's going to take me back to sitting in that jail cell with the person that I call my saving grace at that point. And thank you, God, by the grace of God, I'm going to give a huge shout out. This girl is still sober today, and she is an active member of our community. And man, oh man, I love her. I love her. I love her daughter. I love her spirit. And I'm very grateful for her. And when she shared with me, I can remember this vividly. She was like, so her sponsor at the time, we were only allowed to have like a couple of books, right? Like, and you could have a Bible and like one other. And her sponsor brought her a big book up there, and she started describing to me through the pages of our big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the spiritual solution. And man, I was resistant. I could walk into a meeting 2-3 years sober and it'd be a meeting about God, and I'd be like, it'd be something about the spiritual solution of oh my God, there was times I'd get up and walk out. I'd be like, are you kidding me? It took me a while to get to understand the conception of, hey guys, like, here we are. I'm going to all the events. I'm sponsoring these women's. I can talk about it, but can I be about it, right? Like, how can I put this thing into practical action? How can I connect myself to anything that's bigger than me? Because I don't know about y'all, but I'm all I think about without y'all's help. That's just how it goes for me. And so the way that this chapter describes right here at the bottom, and I'm sorry if you can hear the dog barking in the back, y'all. He's a little bitty toy Yorkie, and he ain't but like 2 pounds, but he's got a voice on him that'll go crazy. So on page 41, it's on one of the stories, and it says right here, at the bottom, the last paragraph, the first 5 words, it just says, as soon as I regained my ability to think. And I've got that underlined, and this is after one of our alcoholic friends was had went through his relapse and yada yada yada, and here he is. He's going to be off going to try again at the bar, right? As soon as I regained my ability to think, what that tells me is that left to my own, and I know it's crazy. This whole thing goes into a whole another little story, but they're just those, 5 or 6 words right there. It stops me dead in my tracks, because everything that I've ever thought that I wanted, I have managed to lie, cheat, and steal my way through. Every single thing, whether it was my active drinking career, whether it was stone cold sober, because I'm 30, 60 days in doesn't mean that I'm not still doing the things that, that I think that are going to get me what I want. And it stops me dead in my tracks, because I will, on my own resources, think myself into that drink. I will, on my own resources, think myself into, a chaotic, unrealistic, unpredictable lifestyle. And so, yeah, that's just huge for me, the way, how powerful the mind is. And I could get into a whole nother hour-long talk about that, but for me in this chapter, circling back to the stability that the spiritual understanding, God of my understanding, my higher power gives me is something that I never want to lose touch with. My truth is that I lost touch with that understanding somewhere around 5 years, and I wasn't sure at certain parts in my life if I was gonna be able to reconnect. The feeling, just like the book describes the drink of being so elusive, so crippling, so luxurious to me. The feeling of losing connection with a power greater than myself it was crippling. It was hideous. It was frightening, and so I'm grateful, right? Like, I'm grateful that at some degree, there was still that willingness to ask another person for help, and there he was again. He had never left my side. He continued to show up, and we continued to grow through this thing shoulder to shoulder. And okay, I'm rambling now. Paul, help me.
Yeah, no, you're all right. It's what you're talking about on page 41 is Fred. And Fred's probably Fred's. I love if you go into that on Fred's story. He would normal. It was just an everyday, had the perfect life. Kids were great, family was great, yada. But if you look right here, everything, he kept getting drunk, and then if you go to page 42, it starts sharing about his first step experience. It says 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then they asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic. And if I were really licked this time, I had to concede both propositions. They had piled on me heaps of evidence, which is pretty much their 12-stepping, right? They had piled up on me heaps of evidence to the effect of an alcoholic with a mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. Right? They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen, right? And I love this part. This is his first step experience. It says, this process snuffed out the last flicker of the conviction that I could do the job myself. I realized that. Then it says, then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been a nominal, I think that's what it is, churchman, their proposals was not intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. I like to ask myself what I think that is. I think probably, first off, I can't do it by myself. I'm powerless.
Right.
It's like I don't have the sufficient power, so I have to find some kind of power that's sufficient. Says that was not easy. The moment I had made up my mind to go through with this process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, and as in fact it proved to be. And the next line is huge. It says, quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I think that, I always ask myself, what do you think that, he had to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window? What does that mean? One, I was raised, most of us were raised no, you got to do it yourself. If you don't do it, it's not, whatever. But I think that's probably one of the main ones is I have to have help. I'm licked. I can't do this myself.
Right.
And also, no telling, it could be, depending on the person's background, a big one for me is I got to choose my own conceptions of God, which was completely new, foreign to me until, they outlined the program of action, and I started seeing wow, okay, they're on to something. I love that. That's Fred's first step experience, though.
I'm glad that you touched on old Fred there, because again, we had began to touch on him, and I kind of got trailed off on my rampage, but that's okay. This one, Fred is big for me too, right? So when we talk about that the moral side of of AA, of our lives. I've got or of Fred's story there. I could not think myself sober. I cannot read myself sober. I cannot YouTube, podcast, inspirational books, sanitarium. Self-knowledge is not the answer, right? It's just not it. Or at least it's not for me. It's not sufficient enough for me. And then that's just been my experience time after time. I've seen folks who come in, they can recite the book, they can, write a dissertation, they can, work with other people, but they never become willing to enlarge the spiritual side of the program. They never become willing to get out of the way long enough to allow God to be willing to work. It's like, right? Like, hey, I can tell you the Buddhist concepts, or, what the Bible, what context the Bible was supposed to be out. I can do all these things. I can tell you, what Bill and Bob were really thinking when they wrote page 14 or whatever. I can do those things, right? But can I apply it to my life? And that's where this thing gets real for me. That's where life takes on new meaning. That's where this thing opens up, and the fog begins to clear. And so that's, and how is that possible, right? Like, kind of circling the wagons here is like, okay, that's great. Glad you guys shared all that with me, but how do I actually put this thing into some kind of effective solution? Or we can say like spiritual experience or awakening. Like, how do I get to that space? And for me, it was, my willpower, my reasoning, my moral convictions. That wasn't enough to keep me here, right? Like, not having a set of morals, not, understanding, reasoning, having ran my life into the ground, that's just not enough, right? And it's not going to be enough to keep me sober. Being ate up with guilt, shame, and remorse is not going to keep me sober. Having a new boyfriend is not going to keep me sober. My kids screaming and crying and beating on the door, "Mommy, why?" That's not going to keep me sober. Promising, it's just not going to do it. The book tells me, this chapter describes to me that it is imperative that I find a power greater than myself in order to enlarge my spiritual life and to have that vital experience, period. And it's hard to talk about more about alcoholism without going into, and I'm not going to because somebody else will probably do it, going into We Agnostic and into the preceding chapters that share about how to get to that space, right? Like, am I atheist? Am I agnostic? Am I a believer? Am I, what is it what feels good to me? How am I going to, and I'll tell you, my conception of God has changed over the years a 1,000 times. I can't even begin to tell you, from day to day, sometimes it can look different. It can evolve in one form or another. So I want to touch on one little thing back here on page 567, and then I'll wrap it up because I know you want to keep it right. I want to touch first on just the bedevilment, right? Just to say, like, We have trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional state. We're a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We have that feeling of uselessness. We're full of fear. We were unhappy. And we couldn't seem to be helpful to ourselves or others, right? And what I have found through Alcoholics Anonymous, through a power greater than myself, through living this program one day at a time, is the spiritual experience, And I'm just going to read just a little bit of it, if that's okay, Paul.
Yep.
Back here on page 567, the spiritual experience, it says the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. We'll leave it at that. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. That's what happened to me and more about alcoholism. I had increased the list. Okay, I had increased the list ad infinitum. I had tried every single thing possible. And so this thing goes on to say, though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God conscious, followed at once by the vast change in feeling and outlook. You guys promised me that. Alcoholics Anonymous promised me that. If I would pull up my big girl panties as I was told in the beginning, lace up my shoes and get right with God, get right with myself, clean this house, help others, things were going to transform for me. And that happened. And that's continuing to happen. This thing goes on to say here, it says, among our rapidly growing fellowship of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiencers are what psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. I, my friends, am a slow learner. It takes me a minute. It says, quite often, friends of the newcomers are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself. What often takes place in the few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With a few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unexpected inner resource which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness is a power greater than ourselves, is the essence of a spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God conscious. Most empathetically, we wish to say that an alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. The last little part here, and we'll wrap it up here, Paul. It says, there is a principle which is bar against all information, which is proof against all argument, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Herbert Spencer. I gotta have God. I gotta have God. I gotta have God. I have to understand why it is that I do the things that I do and why I've done what I've done. And the only way that I can find that sobriety that we talk about in this thing, that peace of mind, that hope from hopeless state, is by becoming open to the ideas that you guys are laying at my feet. And I'm grateful. Thank you for your time, Paul. Thank you guys for listening. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you. Good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the episode everyone's been waiting on. That's it. Yeah. Good job.
Funny.
Good job. We'll have to do some more stuff later on. And yeah, it was awesome. I love that, the spiritual experience. So yeah, it's like the common theme that we've been talking about is how important it is to have a spiritual experience. And I think that what happens in so many so many circles, especially the newer, meetings that have a lot of newer people, they don't understand, like, calling a sponsor and going to meetings and all this stuff is great. But at the end of the day, hopefully it's pointing us towards, we get through this step work and have that vital spiritual experience, just like what was been talked about. And, just have a change of heart, my reaction to life starts changing. And, like we mentioned earlier, a power greater than ourselves had separated us from alcohol. So we just, hopefully through that process of working the steps, as we start learning how to rightly relate ourselves to the power. And, that spiritual basis is what we've always been, what I realized I was always looking for, learning how to form a relationship with it. Bill says, to establish and maintain the new order of things, and, that's the key to all of it. So great job. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And if any of the listeners that would want to get a hold of Lisa, feel free to send us an email at recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. Also, you can obviously comment on the YouTube channel. This upcoming week, 1 week from today, actually, my sponsor is actually going to be on here, John E.
Oh, Lord. Come on, John.
From Lebanon, Tennessee. We're going to do We Agnostics. And so we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. Also, just a few things. Like I mentioned earlier, Scott Lee had a book that he came out with. It's called Life is the School, Love is the Subject. And we're on Sunday, July 13th, we're going to be doing an episode on that. Also, Jay Stennett from Arizona has a new documentary that he'd been working on for quite a while with Bill Shaberg, is in there with him. Jay has done a lot of good work over the years, and with this documentary, it's called Conscious Contact. It's a new Bill W. documentary, and it's awesome. It's about Bill's spiritual journey towards the later part of his life. After the big book and all that had wrote, he had gotten into transcendental meditation over the last few years of his life, and they got a lot of history stuff. So Jay is going to do 3 episodes with me this month, and it's going to be, Tuesday, all of them are Tuesdays. It's July 15th, July 22nd, and July 29th. We also have Bill Shaberg, which did writing the big book. We're going to do 2 episodes with him on July 20th, Sunday, July 20th, and Sunday, July 27th. So we got a whole cool month. It's a history month this month, and it's going to be interesting to see what these guys, what they got to add to the show. So thanks, babe, and have a good night.
Love you. Thank you.
All right, love you.
Bye.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.